Hello everyone and welcome to Get Real with Morton. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Frank from Zin Wealth. And the reason I say he's a very special guest is that Frank and his team have been helping everyone at Morton in terms of setting up financial plans and running seminars for us. And I've got to say, even I was like, Frank, they were great.
Thank
you really
you.
know what you're talking about. So we have got an expert with us. So what we're here to talk about today is some of the tax consequences that buyers, sellers, landlords need to consider when they are buying properties. And it does get a little bit murky. And even in our pre-discussion that we had, you were able to address some stuff that I didn't know either. So let's get started with people who are selling a property. And whether you're an owner-occupier or an investor, the big thing that is going to affect you is capital gains tax.
Exactly.
So maybe you can talk us through that, because one of the things I find people do is sometimes they're investors, sometimes they're not, like i.e. they've lived in the property, they've not lived in it. How does that work and how does somebody protect themselves from that?
The moment that you acquire this property and the moment that you're living in there is pretty much determined what the tax outcome is. I guess at the point when you sell the property is to understand what's going to be the tax that you're going to pay.
Yep.
And that's very important. And in Australia, we need to pay a tax called capital gain tax.
Capital gain tax.
Whatever that you purchased and whatever that you sell, the difference is whatever the money that you made, and we call it capital gain. Luckily, as an individual, if you hold on to this property for over 12 months, you get 50% discount. So let's say you got a $500,000 property and it went up to $1 million and you got $500,000 gain, half of it doesn't count into your tax.
So you've got to hold the property for more than 12 months.
For more than 12 months.
Tip number one.
That's number one.
Yep.
And number two, which is pretty neat, is we don't need to pay tax if it is our home.
Right.
So if we live in this property and the property went up in value and we sell it, we don't even need to pay $1 to the tax office.
So we like that.
Exactly. But there's actually, it's not that straightforward.
No,
Usually
no.
we move out, treat it as an investment
Yeah,
property.
so let's get complicated now because a lot of people do buy properties to rent them out to live in later.
That's right.
People buy properties that they're live in that they then do rent out later. So how should someone navigate that? Because they obviously, how does capital gains tax work there?
Exactly. I think the most important thing is the moment that you change it from investment to home or home to investment, you need to understand what exactly is the value of that property. So you might need to get a licensed valuer to value the property. And also the first time that you rent the property out, you need to understand if there's any depreciation. For a qualified tax
Depreciation, because
Yes.
everybody forgets that.
That's
okay,
right,
We
yeah.
might come back to that a bit. We'll keep on the capital gains tax.
Sure, not a problem. So if you get a true valuation of understanding what is the market value, then you would be a lot easier for the accountant to work out how much tax you need to pay.
So just on that, does it need to be a valuation from a valuer or is an opinion from a real estate agent enough?
Well, that is the most argued question. The accountant would say, look, you need to get a licensed valuer to do it because we trust more on that and they are licensed to provide that valuation. But usually what happens is the real estate agent would actually know the area better to provide an actual true value.
Also, even I'm just while we're talking this through, because if the valuer does it, it's going to be a lower number. So then if you sell it for a higher number, potentially the capital gains you've got to pay is higher. Whereas a real estate agent that is probably more in touch with the market may have a higher number, so therefore your capital gains might be smaller. I don't know, is the ATO watching this? I don't know. So Frank, what do you do? What's your advice on that?
My advice is definitely you need to talk to your accountant about this and see what kind of evidence that you need to provide to your accountant. Because usually the moment that you change it is best because you haven't sold the property yet, but down the track you might want to sell it or you want to sell it now. But talk to your accountant first and see what is accepted evidence to calculate.
What do you think is accepted?
What I think is whatever that reflects the true value of the property.
Right,
that is
there you go.
accepted.
How was that for a great bit of a murky answer there? But I suppose the key thing that you've just said there is when you do change, so you are owner-occupied to investor or the other way around, is just you've got a moment there where you need to get some paperwork in order and you've got to establish what the value of the property is at that point. And I think
Exactly.
a lot of people try and do it prospectively because they didn't realize.
That's right.
So a bit of admin is needed. So that's a very critical point.
Exactly. We find it because over the years, you might have some repairs and you might have different tax lodgements, different reports. It's good that you have a folder to have these filed in different subfolders for particular documents and invoices. When you go back and look at it, you
I'm
can...
feeling tired, frankly, listening to this. So interesting, though. This is actually it's quite fascinating because obviously when it becomes an investment, then there's a lot of expenses that you can now deduct from your tax.
That's right.
Right. So all those repairs that you did when it was owner-occupied, no one's interested in that.
That's
Doesn't
right.
matter. But you've got to be clear that when you do move to investor, that you start tracking these things.
Exactly.
So the week before, the hot water system needs to be replaced. Well, that's part of maintenance of your home. The week later, because it's an investment, you can then start deducting those expenses.
Yeah, exactly. Even if you just put in a new washer in there and you renovate the kitchen and rent it out, that's something that you need to put into consideration.
Right, so timing is important with these things. Very interesting because, of course, you can claim your interest payments, you can claim your expenses, council rates, your agent costs. And the other big one that I always like to throw in there is depreciation.
That's right.
So a lot of people even think on an older property that there is no depreciation, but that's not actually true.
No. There are actually depreciation can be claimed. That's the reason why when you purchase a property as an investment property, it is important to have a licensed tax agent to do the proper depreciation report and then follow that schedule and lodge your tax return.
So let's have some tips, some hot tips there. If you are changing from owner-occupier to investor, make sure that you've established the value of the property and you've got documented evidence. Be conscious that your expenses start being tax deductible after that moment. And at that time, get a depreciation schedule done so you can claim that on your expenses. And particularly if you've done some repairs and maintenance, like some people do, they do tidy things up or improve things before they rent it. So make sure you get that depreciation.
Absolutely.
That's very good. Thank you for that. So we've actually covered quite a bit of territory there, but I actually think that's probably the most important thing.
That's right.
I have lots of conversations with people that get confused about these things. I'd like to move on to buyers. And I think another area of confusion is first home grants, how they work, moving in and out of the property. Does everybody's head in as to what they should be doing? What's your advice on that?
Well, New South Wales State Revenue Office already designed a very neat calculator. Or you basically just need to put in your situation in, what kind of property you want to buy, and then they will tell you what kind of benefit that you can get.
Well, because those first home owner grants do tend to change.
That's right.
They move around a bit depending on how the government's feeling.
Absolutely. So if you put into the search engine, say, New South Wales First Home Owner Grant, and they will come up with the New South Wales State Revenue Office website, and it will have a calculator. All you need to do is just follow it through, and then you'll see what kind of benefit you would have. So generally what happened is we have a First Home Owner Grant, which is $10,000 for a certain properties that you purchased under a certain value.
What's the value at the moment?
So at the moment, it's $600K.
$600K.
It needs to be a brand new property.
Can you get anything in Sydney for that? Well, you can, but
not much. But still, I think that attracts a lot of attention because there are still regional New South Wales that are booming. You know, people wanted to be there, living there. So all you need to do really just to get on the website and check it, you need to be aware of the threshold. Let's say for $600K, and then you see something that is selling for $620, that means potentially you're losing $10,000 grand for your first home.
Right. So even though you're a first home owner, because you're over that threshold,
that's right,
you don't get the 10 grand.
Exactly.
Okay, that's good.
And on top of that, you will have, we call it transfer duty, but it's actually stamp duty that we used to pay. You can have actually exemptions on stamp duties when it goes to a certain level, because these are changing always with the stamp duty threshold.
They're always changing.
Yes. So it's best to get on the website and see what is the latest number.
So on that, so they get some confusion too, because some of the first home owner grant is for owner occupied people.
That's right.
So how long do they need to owner occupy the property for?
Yeah, there is actually a clear guideline on the website. So you need to be living there for a minimum of 12 months to claim the first.
So they've got to move into the property for 12 months?
Exactly. When it is settled, they need to move in and live there for at least 12 months.
Right. Yeah. And then at the end of the 12 months, we go back to our original conversation, is you've got to, once you start to rent it out, make sure you've done all your appropriate
paperwork. Yes, that's right.
So is there anything else that you think buyers need to be mindful of?
There's a lot. It's pretty overwhelming. You know? Every year when it gets to the budget time, we'll look at what kind of the new incentives are there. And it's very hard to catch up because last year's one probably is going to be different. When you're starting to wanting to buy a property, just make sure you do your proper research and see what kind of the grant that I can get and how that's going to help me with the cash savings for me to acquire this particular property. And once you formulate a strategy, then you would have a budget range of that particular property you want to buy.
You know what? So listening to you talk, Frank, goes really, if you are out there and you're thinking of buying a property, come and talk to Frank first. Because people go out looking for properties without understanding the tax consequences. They don't understand the stamp duty consequences.
Yep.
And in some cases, they haven't even got their finance sorted.
That's right.
So In Wealth will help you with that.
That's
That's really your first call is how much money can you borrow? Then start looking at it. So really,
Absolutely.
you're almost like the first. We need to see you before we actually start looking at properties.
Yes, we have our mortgage team that would help sort everything out, telling you what the benefit that you can get as a first home buyer, helping you to find the right price range with the right
How much
loan.
money you can borrow.
Exactly, yeah.
Which inevitably turns out not to be as much as you would like. But that's a whole nother journey. Well, thank you. So, Frank, that's actually been really good. I'm going to get you back because even talking to you, I had a million other things I want to ask you about investment stuff. So we'll definitely be getting you back. But I think those tax tips that you've given us today have been gold. And I think that they're going to be really helpful for anybody who is wanting to work out what to do their property from a tax point of view. So thank you, everyone. This is Get Real at Morton. This is Frank. My name's Ewan Morton. We'll see you next month.